Coming up, the triumph and tragedy of Israel.
Israel is seriously at risk. It is right now powerful militarily, economically, but its fundamental condition is the condition of a nation on the edge.
Israeli journalist Ari Shavit discusses his nation's Zionist roots, its vibrant and edgy present, and its uncertain future. It's just ahead on Global Ethics Forum.
Our speaker, Ari Shavit, is one of Israel's leading newspapers' columnists and one of its most important political commentators. He not only influences readers in Israel, but commands attention and respect here in the United States. You just had to read Tom Friedman's glowing endorsement of his new book, My Promised Land, The Triumph and Tragedy of Israel, in the November 17th New York Times to know what I'm referring to.
When I decided to write the book, people asked me, why do this? There are so many books about Israel, and great books, biographies, history books, academic books, polemics, a lot of polemics. But I had a feeling that with all these books, a lot of them great books, it's been decades, probably 40 years, since an Israeli wrote a real, deep, personal nonfiction that does the real soul-searching of that country, of the nation I grew up in. And my conclusion was that it was no accident, because in many ways, we Israelis lost our narrative. So I set out on this mission to try to write the narrative again, to bring in the big picture. Because like it or not, Israel is an amazing, unique phenomenon. And I tried to bring the understanding of that back. That was what I wished for. I wanted a new kind of Israel conversation, that it will address the real Israel condition in all its complexity. I wanted to enable people who want to love Israel to love it again, but in a critical and realistic and moral way, not in a kind of dogmatic way. I begin with the arrival of my great-grandfather, who was a very successful, self-made lawyer in London, one of the first founders of Zionism before Herzl. And he travels to Palestine in April 1897, a few months before the first Zionist Congress assembles in Basel. And I asked myself, why does he go there? Unlike 99% of the Jews who went to Palestine, he had no need to go there. He was not persecuted, he was not poor, he had a future. Why should a Victorian gentleman that made it, that lives in St. John's Wood, why should he go to a desolate, remote wasteland that Palestine was? And my conclusion is that there were two major reasons. One, my great-grandfather and his peers, the founders of Zionism, were brilliant in the sense that they saw that Europe is turning violent in its relationship to the Jews. This is no news, because Europe was always after its Jewish minority. It's difficult for us to imagine it now. We have so many European diplomats sitting here. But for centuries, for a millennium, Jews were Europe's other. Jews were the ones that Europe could not find a way to live with. But that was old problem with Jews, old anti-Semitism. That was Christian religious-based anti-Semitism. The surprise was that the new Europe that was emerging, much more secular, much more well-educated, much more enlightened, that new Europe developed a hate for the Jews that was even more dangerous, based on nationalism, not on religion. But the genius, it's not that my great-grandfather and Herzl and their friends knew there will be an Auschwitz. But when you look at it, what they did was to preempt Auschwitz. 40, 50 years before, they realized that the Jews of Eastern Europe and Central Europe will face existential danger. They thought it'll be some sort of mega pogrom. They didn't know there will be gas chambers. But the fact that these people led an endeavor that is so dramatic, it's the most dramatic revolution one can imagine, to take a people from one continent to another, to establish a nation, to revive a language, to create a home for homeless people, because they realized that there is physical danger ahead. And if you see that, you see what genius and what justification there was to Zionism. It was a race against time to save European Jewry. Sadly, the real flaw in Zionism, contrary to what is said about it, is just that it was too late. Had Zionism started 20, 30 years earlier, 6 million Jews would have been saved. 6 million humans. It doesn't count that they're Jews, humans. So in this sense, that endeavor was the most, it was not only brilliant, was the most, more on universal basis. It is the most just one you can imagine. Then they had another notion. And that is that while Jews are in jeopardy in the East, in East Europe, Jews in the West face a different danger, because they realized that the old way Judaism existed, Jewish cultures existed, was within the ghetto. And that once the walls of the ghettos are down, Jewish, non-Orthodox, non-ultra-Orthodox Jewish civilization is in danger. In this sense, they did not know there will be a pure report, but they anticipated it. They said that if we are to maintain non-Orthodox Jewish civilization, there needs to be a place that is the anchor of Jewish, modern, secular identity. So these were the two brilliant ideas that actually brought my great-grandfather and his peers to Palestine. But then there was the flaw. And the flaw was that they could not see there were other people there. The flaw was that my Victorian great-grandfather comes to Palestine in his Thomas Cook tour, riding carriages throughout the country, and he doesn't see the Palestinians. His need to create a home for his people is so deep, so great, that he would not see that there is another people there. So basically, what you see, talking of the triumph and the tragedy, you see something that is, on the one hand, so impressive, so brilliant, so just in universal terms. And on the other hand, you see an inherent flaw. And the inherent flaw created this conflict, and the fact that we fail time after time after time to end this conflict is no accident. Because I'm an anti-occupation guy, but the conflict is not about occupation. I'm an anti-settlement guy, but the conflict is not about settlements. The conflict is a deep, deep conflict, probably the worst, if not, or one of the worst on this planet, because it has a religious element, it has a cultural element, it has a national element, and it has this element of an indigenous population that sees the Jews who return to their land as outsiders, as colonizers. This is what makes the conflict. And this is the ongoing tragedy. Fast forward to the last chapter. I follow the footsteps of my great-grandfather. And I try to look at what was achieved and what was not achieved. And you see these two elements there. Because on the one hand, Israel is, I mean, usually, and again, I'm such an anti-occupation guy, but we usually, the Israeli condition now is based on two pillars. On the one hand, we are an occupying nation. Unlike any other democracy like the ones that we want to be like, we occupy another people. And I think, of course, we should deal with that. But on the other hand, we are the most intimidated nation on the face of the earth. And part of the problem in the controversies and the discussion about Israel, that the people on the left worldwide, including in Israel, focus all the time on occupation. While the people, they just see Israel as the Goliath controlling others. While the people on the right, throughout the world and in Israel, tend to just look at intimidation. They just see it as endangered. But the only way to really look at it is to look at both. But what I see there when I travel throughout the country is really, on the one hand, an intimidated nation, and I describe it in many ways. Israel is seriously at risk. It is right now powerful militarily, economically, but its fundamental condition is the condition of a nation on the edge. But what I see on the other hand is this amazing feast of life that Israel is. And this is the other element that I would want people to relate to. Israel is not only about the conflict, it's not only about the Palestinian issue, not only about the debates with ultra-Orthodox. At the end of the day, what happened in that country is that the utopia the founders tried to create is not there. Israel is not a utopia in any sort of way. The dream, so to speak, of a paradise was shattered. But in the process, while this dream was shattered, what was created there is one of the most robust, energetic, creative societies I know. Life is astonishing in Israel between the war. It's not only that we have this amazing economic success talked about in recent years. It's not only this startup nation. This is one of the reflections of Israeli vitality and creativity. And the amazing story, if you take a step back, is you have there a people that are the ultimate victims of the 20th century. And don't anyone forget that. The ultimate victims of the 20th century. But these people were not addicted to their victimhood. They did not linger over their pain. They did not turn it into suicide bombing. They were not seduced by a constant feeling of revenge. Their revenge was to live, to have babies, to have the babies get good education, to move on, to party. Israel is a lot of fun, a lot of fun. So what you have is this amazing phenomena of a nation that is on the edge, that you don't know what the future holds for it, but it celebrates life in every way possible. And it creates a feast of life, a spectacular of life, of the people who came from death and are still surrounded by the threat of death, but have chosen life. Thank you.
What will happen? What will Israel do when, if, as seems unfortunately likely right now, within X years, it becomes a majority Muslim or Arab population?
There's no way that the Jewish democratic state can survive if occupation goes on. So this is the real cancer eating us from within. I think that the great mistake done here by the Israeli left and by the international community is composing two different issues and thinking they are one. One issue is occupation, the other issue is peace. We made a logical error. We combined the two. They are not the same. And the reason we are stuck with occupation is that intellectual, logical mistake. Because the left and the international community were totally right in saying that occupation is disastrous. They were totally right in saying settlements are futile and suicidal. But they were wrong in promising peace tomorrow. Because it's not clear that there is a partner for full, final peace. It's not clear that there's maturity on all sides to have a final status agreement. And this is why I'm an adamant Plan B guy. I mean, had I been Israel's prime minister, Yes, I would have gone, Secretary Kerry, I would have taken the Olmert plan, the Barak plan, the Clinton parameters, you name it. I would have taken Israel's greatest peacenik, Yossi Beilin. I would have told him, Yossi, you have the mandate, bring me a signed document in 6 months. For 20 years now, we are in this all or nothing cycle. Either we'll have peace next March, or we'll have another 50,000 settlers there. Now, because there isn't peace till next March, next March 92, next 97, March 2002, March 2007, Democratic president, Republican president, different secretary, we tried it all. We tried it so many times. We've been through this movie so many times. And what is the result? More settlements. So I think it's time to learn from that. Yes, let's try final status. But if it doesn't work, let's not be idle. Let's see that. Let's create a new imaginative plan where Israel gradually ends occupation. You cannot, if there is no peace deal, you cannot expect Israel to retreat to the 67 line within a week or a year. It has to be a long, cautious, gradual process where we deal with our malaise, which is occupation, while the Palestinians deal with their internal malaise, which is the lack of a political body and a constructive political culture. So if the international community, rather than waste time all the time on these theological debates that lead us nowhere, if it would orchestrate two coordinated unilateral processes where we deal with occupation and they gradually, in a Fayyad kind of way, build their nation. This will bring us to what I call a two-state state. It will not be total peace, but it will create a situation that is reasonable, that is unofficial peace. And then, I hope, we will be mature enough on both sides to negotiate the final deal. But to jump from where we are to solving all these issues is, in my mind, totally ignoring reality as it is. And the result is really having Israel stuck as an occupying power, which is something that is morally wrong, politically dangerous, and should be dealt with at once.
Following what you have just said, I kind of want to ask you kind of a tripartite question. So within Israel, where is the leadership to take your path? There's now a new leader of the Israel Labor Party, the son of Chaim Herzog. Where is the leadership within the Palestinian movement to move toward the outline you have proposed?
Where do I begin? Let me begin with this country. I'm as pro-American as anyone can get, perhaps more than many Americans. Again, because I can see it from perspective. I think that with all its faults, not only is America is a great democracy, and in this sense, what the Jews have in this country is just an indication of how noble and great this country is. I mean, the fact that you have the perfect Jewish diaspora, the first one in millennia in this country, is no accident. It's a result of the deep, deep democratic, free society you have. And coming from where I come, don't take that for granted. But beyond that, American leadership since World War II, even before, but definitely since World War II, made the world a much better place. Or to put it differently, not as bad as it could have been. So I dread, I worry about my country. I'm fearful of a world not led by America. And when I come to this country now, and I see the divisions within you, and the polarization, and political tribalism, and Washington dysfunctional, I'm deeply worried. Up until I said it before to Joanne, up until 10 years ago in conversations in Israel, we kept saying, why cannot we be like Americans? But rather than Israelis becoming Americans, Americans became Israeli. So I really hope, and if I'm into getting beyond the controversies and talking sense, I really wish and pray that America that things will improve here in every way, whether it's the healthcare or foreign policy. Now talking about our problems back home. There are two reasons for the failure to do all the reasonable things that I said that I think should have been done a long time ago and must be done. One is an intellectual failure. This is what I discussed. The fact that the Israeli left and left of center never went, we never really, I mean, Oslo was so impressive and Oslo was such a failure. The Camp David Peace Summit was so courageous in 2000 and it was such a failure. The Olmert Initiative was such a failure. It was time for us to draw some conclusions. The fact that we were intellectually lazy and dogmatic. People who are supposed to be progressive have to be open-minded. And the fact that we, the open-minded people, stuck to some dogmatic concept, not being able to bring like a new peace idea, that is, in my mind, the major part of the failure. And I think that if we do that, if we bring a realistic process, you will see that Israelis are actually much more moderate and reasonable than they are, because most Israelis are not that extremists. We are in the hands of extremists because we failed to convince the center that we know what the Middle East is about and what the conflict is about. And if a realistic concept is being brought to the table, I think we will win the hearts of 60–70% of Israelis. That's one issue. The other issue is, of course, the leadership issue, which goes with just what I said. I'm not talking about a Ben Gurion or a Roosevelt or de Gaulle or a Churchill. The Israeli center and center-left failed to produce a Bill Clinton or a Tony Blair. The only reason Netanyahu is there in power is because he, with all his flaws, he's the only presidential figure around. So it's quite astonishing that Israel's elite, that people who are so successful in economic affairs, so successful in academic life, in technology, in arts, and all that, are a terrible political failure. Of all of Israel's political tribes, the most sophisticated people are the most primitive political tribe. And I think it's a combination of the two that creates the problem. I believe that if we'll have not leadership in the sense of one person, but if we'll have a reasonable, noble, pragmatic political elite, we can lead the Israeli people to a much better future.
Over the past few decades, one gets the feeling that Israel's foreign and military policy is based on fundamentally on the proposition that no matter what Israel does, the United States will finally back it. Now, the rest of the world certainly believes that. You get the feeling that Israel believes that the U.S. military is in the Middle East for Israel.
To say it mildly, I think this is an overstatement. First of all, I think it's my duty as an Israeli, it's our duty as Israelis, not to create that impression and not to live under that assumption. But the whole point about creating that land, that nation, was for us to be able to defend ourselves. And I just want to remind you, actually, that the great drama concerning Iran in the last 2 or 3 years was America asking Israel not to defend itself. Let's put it this way. I think there are historic traumas here. And when people come to criticize parts of the American Jewish community and parts of the political activity, one has to remember the formative trauma. And the formative trauma is a trauma of 1944, when we knew what was going on, when the information was in Washington, when the American Air Force had all the ability it has, and when we all failed to act. And I think that there is a formative trauma within the American Jewish community of what has happened there. Not to see that because we are embarrassed, because we have our complexes, we do not act when the time is right. Now, many people criticize the mentioning of that trauma. but I think we have a right to remember that. The Fed's policy to this day is influenced by the trauma of the Depression. The German financial policy, monetary policy, is influenced to this day by the trauma of the German inflation. We are a people that had experienced the most dramatic of traumas. And therefore, I think it is legitimate for us to have it in our veins. And yet, we should not abuse it. We should not abuse the power we have. We have to be cautious. We have to be listening. And we need to have a much healthier relationship between America and Israel. A relationship where there is intimacy, there are shared values, I think there are mutual interests, but where there is less friction and no attempt of one side to twist the arm of the other. And in this sense, I really hope that we will have a much more noble and respectable relationship than some of the things that we've seen in recent years.
Well, thank you for one of the most thoughtful mornings we have had here. That was excellent, excellent.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.